May 1944, Yugoslavia. German mortars are raining down. 6 British soldiers lie dead. And one man stands in the middle of hell playing bagpipes. The Germans think he's lost his mind. They're about to capture the last Allied soldier alive. But this isn't just any soldier. This is Jack Churchill. And playing music while everyone dies? That's not even the craziest thing he's done. While the world fought World War II with machine guns and tanks, one British officer charged into battle with a sword, a longbow, and Scottish bagpipes. He killed enemies with arrows, captured 42 Nazi soldiers using only a blade, escaped from a concentration camp, and did it all because he believed one simple rule. Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. This sounds impossible. It sounds made up, but every single word is true, documented in military records, verified by eyewitnesses, awarded with medals for actions so insane they couldn't be anything but real. This is the story of Mad Jack Churchill, the bagpipe-playing, sword-swinging warrior who refused to fight like everyone else, the man who brought medieval warfare to the 20th century, and somehow, impossibly, it worked. This is his story, the most unbelievable true story of World War II. And it starts with one question. How does a man with a sword survive the deadliest war in human history? Let's find out. May 1944. The island of Brač, off the coast of Yugoslavia. German mortars are raining down. 6 British commandos lie dead or dying. And in the middle of this hell, one man stands playing bagpipes. The Germans advancing toward him think he's lost his mind. They're about to capture the only Allied soldier left alive. His name is Jack Churchill. And this is not even close to the craziest thing he's done in this war. While the rest of the world fought World War II with machine guns, tanks and bombs, one British officer charged into battle with a sword, a longbow and a set of Scottish bagpipes. He captured 42 enemy soldiers with nothing but a blade. He escaped from a Nazi concentration camp. He killed men with arrows while bullets flew past his head. And he did it all because he believed in one simple rule. Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. That was his actual philosophy. Not a joke, not bravado. That's how Lieutenant Colonel John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill actually fought the most modern war in human history. You've probably never heard this story. That's because it sounds completely made up. No screenwriter would dare put this in a movie. Too unrealistic, they'd say. Too over the top. But every single thing you're about to hear actually happened. It's all documented. Military records, war diaries, eyewitness accounts, medals awarded for actions so insane they had to be real because nobody would believe fiction this wild. This is the true story of Mad Jack Churchill, the bagpipe-playing, sword-swinging, arrow-shooting maniac who became the most unbelievable soldier of World War II. But before we get to the battles, the captures, and the impossible escapes, we need to understand something important. Jack Churchill wasn't born into war. He wasn't raised in some medieval castle dreaming of knights and glory. He came from a very normal British colonial family. And that's what makes his story even more remarkable. This man chose to become a legend. He decided that modern warfare was too impersonal, too distant, too lacking in what he called proper military spirit. So he brought back the old ways. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. September 16th, 1906. Colombo, British Ceylon. That's Sri Lanka today. Jack Churchill was born into the kind of family that built the British Empire. His father, Alec Fleming Churchill, worked as a district engineer in the Ceylon civil service. Respectable job, good posting. The Churchill family had been in colonial administration for generations. Jack's grandfather had held the same position before his father. This was a family that understood duty, service, and the rigid structure of British imperial life. Young Jack grew up in that world of rules and expectations and proper British behaviour, and then he spent the rest of his life gleefully smashing every single one of those expectations into pieces. The The family didn't stay in Ceylon long after Jack was born. They moved back to England, settling in Dormansland, Surrey. Normal English countryside, quiet village life. Then in 1910, when Jack was just 4 years old, the family packed up again and moved to British Hong Kong. His father had been appointed Director of Public Works, another promotion, another posting. Jack spent his early childhood moving between countries, experiencing different cultures, seeing how the British Empire operated from the inside. He had 2 brothers, Thomas Bell Lindsay Churchill, born in 1907, and Robert Alec Farquhar Churchill, born in 1911 in Hong Kong. All 3 brothers would end up serving in World War II. All 3 would become known for extraordinary bravery. But Jack would become the legend. 1917. The family returned to England for good. Jack was 11 years old. The First World War was still raging across Europe, and Britain was a country transformed by total war. Young Jack saw the soldiers, heard the stories, absorbed the culture of military heroism that dominated British life. He was sent to King William's College on the Isle of Man for his education, a traditional boarding school, the kind of place designed to produce proper British gentlemen and military officers. Jack learned the curriculum, he followed the rules. But something else was developing inside him, a fascination with history, with old battles, with the way warriors used to fight before gunpowder changed everything. After King William's College, there was only one logical path for a young man from Jack's background: the Royal Military College at Sandhurst, Britain's elite officer training academy. He enrolled and graduated in 1926 at the age of 20. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Manchester Regiment, a solid infantry regiment with a long history. Jack Churchill was now officially a British Army officer. His military career had begun, and for the next decade it would be completely, absolutely, mind-numbingly boring. He was posted to Burma with the Manchester Regiment, colonial garrison duty. The kind of posting where nothing happens for months at a time. You guard things, you drill, you maintain discipline, you deal with paperwork. For most officers, this was just the job. Necessary, but dull. For Jack Churchill, it was torture. He needed adventure. He needed challenge. He needed something that would test him physically and mentally. So he found his own ways to create excitement. He bought a Zenith motorcycle and decided to ride it 1,500 miles across the Indian subcontinent, alone, through terrain that would challenge experienced riders. He crashed into a water buffalo at one point, got back on the bike, kept going. That was Jack Churchill at 20 years old, already proving that normal people's definition of danger didn't apply to him. But Burma had one thing that caught Jack's attention. Time. Lots of empty time. Time to develop skills that had nothing to do with modern military training. He learned to play the bagpipes, not because he had Scottish heritage, not because it was required. He just thought bagpipes were magnificent and decided to master them. He also started seriously practicing archery. Not casual target shooting. Real, committed, competitive level archery. He studied technique. He built strength. He spent hours every day perfecting his draw, his aim, his release. Other officers thought he was eccentric. Jack didn't care what other officers thought. By 1936, Jack Churchill had been in the army for 10 years. He was 30 years old, and he was done. Completely done with peacetime military service. The garrison duty was driving him insane. There were no wars to fight, no campaigns to join, no way to prove himself in actual combat. So he did something that shocked his fellow officers. He resigned his commission and left the British Army. His military career appeared to be over before it had really begun. But Jack Churchill wasn't giving up on adventure. He was just looking for it somewhere else. He moved to Nairobi, Kenya, and took a job as a newspaper editor. Colonial Kenya was still wild territory in the 1930s. British settlers, African communities, big game hunting, and the rough edge of empire. Jack loved it. But he also kept up with his unusual hobbies. the bagpipes, the archery. And now he added something new, male modelling. Yes, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Churchill, future war hero and Nazi-fighting maniac, worked as a male model in the 1930s. He had the look, tall, lean, angular features, intense eyes. He posed for advertisements and catalogues. He made decent money. And he absolutely did not care that it was considered unusual for a former British Army officer to be modelling clothes. But the archery was becoming more than a hobby. Jack was getting genuinely good. Competition level good. National team good. In 1938, he entered a military piping competition at the Aldershot Tattoo and took second place. Then, in 1939, something incredible happened. Jack Churchill was selected to represent Great Britain at the World Archery Championships in Oslo, Norway. He competed against the best archers in the world. He placed 26th. Not bad for someone who taught himself in the jungles of Burma and the ranges of Kenya. But more importantly, he proved something to himself. He could take an ancient weapon and compete at the highest level. He could master skills that most people considered obsolete. And then, in September 1939, everything changed. Nazi Germany invaded Poland. Britain declared war. The world was about to be consumed by the largest, most destructive conflict in human history. And Jack Churchill, who had resigned from the army 3 years earlier because there were no wars to fight, immediately rushed to rejoin. He was 33 years old. Most men that age with his background would take a safe staff position, training duty maybe, logistics, something behind the lines. Not Jack Churchill. He wanted combat. He wanted action. He wanted to find out if all those years of training with swords and bows and ancient warrior skills meant anything in a modern war. The British Army welcomed him back. They needed experienced officers. They commissioned him back into the Manchester Regiment with his previous rank. And in early 1940, Lieutenant Jack Churchill shipped out to France as part of the British Expeditionary Force. He was finally going to war. And he made sure he went properly dressed. He packed his service rifle and pistol like every other officer, but he also packed something else, a Scottish basket-hilted broadsword, a longbow and a quiver of arrows, and his beloved bagpipes. His fellow officers saw him loading this equipment and thought he'd lost his mind. This is World War II, they said. We have machine guns, artillery, tanks. What are you going to do with a sword? Jack Churchill just smiled. You'll see, he told them. You'll see. He had no idea that within weeks he would use that longbow to kill a man, that the sword would become his trademark, that the bagpipes would become a weapon of psychological warfare, that he would capture dozens of enemy soldiers using only medieval weapons, that he would escape from concentration camps and survive impossible battles and become the most legendary soldier in British commando history. All he knew was that he was finally going to war, and he was going to fight it his way, the old way, the warrior's way. The stage was set, the weapons were ready, and Mad Jack Churchill was about to show the German Wehrmacht what real fear looked like. Not from bullets, not from bombs, but from a man who didn't belong in their century, a man who fought like he'd stepped out of a history book, a man who was about to prove that sometimes the old ways worked better than anyone expects. The war was just beginning, and Jack Churchill was ready. France, May 1940. The German blitzkrieg is tearing through Europe like a wildfire. Belgium has fallen. The Netherlands surrendered in 5 days. Now the Nazi war machine is rolling through France, and nothing seems capable of stopping it. The British Expeditionary Force, 30,000 men strong, is being pushed back toward the coast. Chaos everywhere. Refugees clogging the roads. Stukas screaming overhead. Panzer divisions punching through defensive lines like they're made of paper. This is the collapse. This is what defeat looks like. And somewhere in this nightmare, Jack Churchill is about to make history with a weapon that hasn't killed anyone in combat for hundreds of years. The Manchester Regiment arrived in France expecting to hold defensive positions along the border. That plan lasted about 3 weeks. By mid-May, they were in full retreat along with everyone else. The speed of the German advance shocked everyone. Military strategists had predicted months of fighting. Instead, France was falling in weeks. British commanders were scrambling to establish new defensive lines, evacuate civilians, and keep their forces from being completely cut off and destroyed. It was the worst possible introduction to modern warfare. Total chaos, no clear front lines, enemy forces appearing where they shouldn't be, communications breaking down, units getting separated, officers making decisions with incomplete information and praying they were right. Jack Churchill thrived in this chaos. While other officers struggled with the confusion and the speed of events, he seemed energised by it. This was what he'd been waiting for. Real combat, real danger, real chances to prove himself. And he still had his longbow strapped to his back, his sword at his hip, and his bagpipes in his pack. Other soldiers stared at him like he was insane. Here they were, getting hammered by the most advanced military machine ever created, and this lunatic was carrying around medieval weapons. But Churchill didn't care about their opinions. He cared about finding Germans to fight. May 27th, 1940. A small village called L'Epinette near Richebourg in northern France. The Manchester Regiment had been ordered to hold a position overlooking the village. German patrols were probing the area, looking for weak points in the British lines. Churchill's company was dug in on high ground with good visibility of the approaches. They'd been told to watch for enemy movement and engage any patrols that came within range. Standard defensive work. Boring, really, compared to what Churchill wanted. But it was about to get very interesting. Churchill positioned himself in an old tower that gave him a perfect view of the main road through the village. He had 2 infantrymen with him. They were setting up machine gun positions and checking their ammunition. Churchill was doing something completely different. He was stringing his longbow, testing the draw, checking his arrows, making sure everything was ready. The 2 soldiers watched him with a mixture of confusion and amusement. "Sir," one of them finally said, "what exactly are you planning to do with that?" Churchill looked at him with those intense eyes. "I'm going to kill the first German I see with this arrow," he said calmly. "That will be your signal to open fire with the machine guns." The soldiers glanced at each other. Their new officer was definitely mad. They didn't have to wait long. A German patrol appeared on the road below. 5 soldiers moving in a loose formation. They were being cautious, weapons ready, checking windows and doorways as they advanced. Leading them was a sergeant. Young guy, maybe mid-20s. He looked nervous. Smart man. He should have been nervous. Because 70 feet above him, Jack Churchill was drawing back a longbow with an 80-pound pull. The arrow was fitted with a barbed hunting tip, the kind designed to punch through deer hide and muscle. It would go through a man like he was made of cloth. Churchill took his time. He'd practiced this shot thousands of times. Different ranges, different wind conditions, different angles. This was actually an easy shot for someone of his skill level. Stationary target. No wind to speak of. Clear line of sight. He controlled his breathing, felt the tension in the bowstring, calculated the drop-over distance, and released. The arrow crossed the 70 feet in less than a second. The German sergeant never knew what hit him. The arrow struck him in the left side of his chest. The barbed tip punched straight through his ribcage and into his heart. He was dead before his body hit the ground. His soldiers stared in shock for maybe 2 seconds. Then the machine guns opened up. The rest of the German patrol never had a chance. Caught in the open, their leader dead from a weapon they didn't even recognise, they were cut down in seconds. The 2 British soldiers manning the machine guns couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. Their officer had actually done it. He killed a man with a bow and arrow in 1940, in the middle of World War II. Churchill calmly unstrung his bow and slung it across his back. Then he picked up his rifle. "Right," he said cheerfully. "Let's see if there are any more of them about." The two soldiers just stared at him. This man was either the bravest officer they'd ever met or the craziest, possibly both. Now here's where the story gets complicated, because decades later, Jack Churchill himself would tell people that this famous Longbow kill might not have actually happened. He said in interviews after the war that his bow had been crushed by a lorry earlier in the campaign, that he'd intended to make a Longbow kill, but never got the chance. So did it happen, or didn't it? Here's what we know for certain. Multiple soldiers reported seeing Churchill with a longbow at Lepinette. War diaries from the 4th Infantry Brigade specifically mention Captain Churchill running around with bow and arrows during the retreat. He was definitely carrying the weapon. He was definitely in combat during this period. And he was definitely awarded the Military Cross for his actions in France, with the citation mentioning extraordinary bravery under fire. So what's the truth? Most historians believe the Longbow kill did happen, but Churchill later downplayed it because he didn't want his entire war record reduced to one sensational story. He wanted credit for his tactical leadership and his commando operations, not just for being the guy who killed someone with a bow. Or maybe the bow really was crushed, and the story grew in the telling, the way war stories do. Either way, one thing is absolutely certain. Jack Churchill fought in France with medieval weapons, and whether or not that specific kill happened exactly as reported, his actions earned him his first decoration for valour. The legend of Mad Jack was beginning. The situation in France continued to deteriorate. By late May, the British Expeditionary Force was compressed into an increasingly small pocket around the port of Dunkirk. The evacuation was beginning. Operation Dynamo. The desperate effort to get as many soldiers off the beaches and back to England before the Germans closed the trap completely. Churchill's regiment was part of the rear guard. They were holding positions to buy time for other units to evacuate. It was brutal, exhausting work. Fighting during the day, pulling back at night, trying to maintain unit cohesion while everything fell apart around them. And through all of this, Jack Churchill was still carrying his bow. The war diary from his brigade includes one of the most remarkable sentences in military history. One of the most reassuring sights, it says, was the sight of Captain Churchill as he ran hither and thither with bow and arrow on the beach. Think about that for a second. Dunkirk, one of the most desperate military situations in British history. Thousands of men packed on beaches getting bombed by the Luftwaffe. Ships burning in the harbour. Chaos and death everywhere. And the one thing that reassured the soldiers was seeing their officer running around with a medieval weapon. Like this was all some kind of grand adventure. That tells you everything you need to know about Jack Churchill's effect on morale. He wasn't scared. Or if he was, he never showed it. He treated combat like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like he was born for this. And soldiers respond to that kind of confidence. When your officer is calmly shooting arrows while dive bombers scream overhead, you start to think maybe this situation isn't as hopeless as it looks. Maybe if he's not worried, you shouldn't be either. Churchill understood psychological warfare before most people had even heard the term. He made it off the beaches, got evacuated back to England with the majority of the BEF. 330,000 men pulled off those beaches over 9 days. A miracle of improvisation and courage. But Britain now faced a terrifying reality. The army had escaped, but they'd lost most of their heavy equipment. France was about to fall, and Nazi Germany controlled all of Western Europe. Invasion seemed inevitable. Churchill, the Prime Minister, not our Jack, gave his famous speech. "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall never surrender." Britain was preparing for the worst. But Jack Churchill wasn't interested in defending beaches. He'd seen enough defensive fighting in France. He wanted to attack. He wanted to hit back. He wanted to take the fight to the Germans instead of waiting for them to come to Britain. And there was a new unit forming that was designed to do exactly that. The Commandos, special forces trained for raiding operations, small units that would strike at German-held territory and then disappear before the enemy could respond. Lightning raids on the coast of occupied Europe, sabotage missions, reconnaissance, the kind of warfare that required initiative, courage, and a willingness to take insane risks. It was perfect for Jack Churchill. He volunteered immediately, and the commandos accepted him immediately. They wanted aggressive officers, men who thought differently, men who wouldn't be paralysed by conventional military thinking. And they definitely got that with Churchill. He showed up to commando training with his full arsenal of medieval weapons and his bagpipes. The other volunteers thought he was a joke at first. This guy can't be serious. Then they saw him in training. The man was fearless. He could march longer than anyone else, climb faster, fight harder, and he had this quality that you can't teach. He made other men want to follow him, even when what he was proposing sounded absolutely insane. His younger brother Thomas also joined the commandos. Tom Churchill was cut from the same cloth as his older brother. Tough, brave, aggressive. The two brothers would serve together in multiple operations. Both would earn distinguished service orders. Both would become legends in the commando community. But Jack would always be the more flamboyant one. The one who insisted on bringing his bagpipes to raids. The one who charged into battle playing music and waving a sword. Tom was a brilliant soldier and leader. Jack was something else entirely. Jack was a warrior who'd been born in the wrong century and was trying to fix that mistake. By the end of our 1940, Jack Churchill had been transformed. He wasn't just another army officer anymore, he was a commando. Elite forces, special operations. And he was about to be unleashed on German-occupied Norway in an operation that would make his name famous throughout the British military. The bow and arrow at Lepinette was just the beginning. The sword hadn't even been used yet. The bagpipes had barely been played. And Churchill was just getting started. He'd survived France. He'd survived Dunkirk. He'd proven his weapons worked. Now he was going to prove that sometimes the old ways of war are the most effective. Sometimes what you need isn't more technology. Sometimes what you need is one completely insane officer who refuses to fight like everyone else. The Germans were about to learn that lesson the hard way. Mad Jack Churchill was coming for them, and he was bringing his pipes. December 27th, 1941. The coast of Norway. Freezing cold. Snow everywhere. German-occupied territory. And charging off a landing craft, playing bagpipes at full volume, sword strapped to his waist, is Jack Churchill. He's leading No. 2 Commando in a raid that's about to become legendary. The Germans manning the garrison can hear the pipes echoing across the fjord. They have no idea what's happening. They have no idea what's coming for them, but they're about to find out that the British have sent them something worse than bombs or bullets. They've sent them a madman who thinks he's fighting in the 18th century. Let's back up 6 months. June 1941. Britain is still alone against Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union just got invaded, but they're not really allies yet. America is still neutral. Britain is holding on, but barely. The RAF won the Battle of Britain, so invasion is off the table for now, but Churchill, the Prime Minister, wants to do more than just defend. He wants to attack. He wants to make the Germans worry about every mile of coastline they control. He wants them looking over their shoulders. And that's where the commandos come in. The commandos were Winston Churchill's personal project. Small units of elite soldiers trained for amphibious raids. They'd strike at night, blow up important targets, kill German soldiers, and disappear before reinforcements could arrive. Psychological warfare as much as military action. Make the Germans spread their forces thin trying to defend everywhere. Make them nervous. Make them waste resources on coastal defence instead of offensive operations. It was brilliant strategy. And it required a special kind of soldier. The kind who could operate independently, think on their feet, handle chaos, and absolutely refuse to quit no matter how bad things got. Jack Churchill was born for this. After volunteering for the commandos in late 1940, he'd spent months in brutal training. The commandos didn't mess around. Physical conditioning that broke normal men. Forced marches with full kit over Scottish mountains. Amphibious landing practice in freezing water. Close quarters combat training. Demolitions, navigation, survival skills. They were creating a new kind of soldier, and Churchill thrived in every aspect of it. He was 34 years old, which was actually old for this kind of work. Most commandos were in their early 20s, but Churchill could outmarch, outfight, and outlast men half his age, and he still insisted on bringing his medieval weapons. The training officers didn't know what to make of it at first. "This is modern warfare," they told him. "We have grenades, submachine guns, the latest equipment. Why do you need a sword?" Churchill's response was always the same. Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. Eventually they gave up trying to talk him out of it. If the man wants to carry extra weight, let him. If it makes him feel better, what's the harm? They had no idea that the sword would actually become useful, that Churchill would use it to capture dozens of enemy soldiers, that it would become his trademark weapon. By December 1941, Churchill had been promoted and given command of No. 2 Commando, not because he was the most conventional officer, because he was the opposite. He was aggressive, creative, willing to try things other officers wouldn't consider, and his men loved him. That's the thing about Jack Churchill that the stories sometimes miss. He wasn't just some crazy individual pulling stunts. He was a leader. Men followed him into impossible situations because they trusted him, because they'd seen him in training and in combat and knew he would never ask them to do something he wouldn't do himself. He led from the front, always. The target for Operation Archery was the island of Vågsøy on the Norwegian coast. The Germans had established a garrison there, fish oil factories that were producing glycerin for explosives, coastal guns, a small naval presence. It was a legitimate military target, but more importantly, it was a chance to show the Germans that nowhere was safe, that the British could strike anywhere along the massive coastline of occupied Europe. The raid was planned for late December because the long Arctic nights would give the commandos more darkness to work with. The downside was the cold. Bone-chilling, gear-freezing, fingers-going-numb cold. Churchill prepared for the raid the way he prepared for everything. Thoroughly. Obsessively. He studied maps of the island, memorised the layout of the town, identified every German position, planned primary and secondary objectives, worked out timing down to the minute, and then he added his own special touches. He announced to his men that he would signal the start of the assault by playing his bagpipes. Some of the newer commandos thought he was joking. The veterans who trained with him knew better. He was absolutely serious. They'd heard him practicing the pipes for months, some Scottish tune called the March of the Cameron Men. He'd played it so many times they all knew it by heart now. The mission launched on the morning of December 27th. The commandos left Scapa Flow in Scotland aboard HMS Kenya and several destroyers. The crossing was rough, North Sea in winter, waves like mountains. Half the men were seasick. Churchill stood on deck most of the voyage, apparently immune to the cold and the motion. He was in his element, going into combat, leading men, about to fight the enemy face to face. This was what he'd been training for his entire life. They approached Vågsøy before dawn. The plan was to land at first light, use the surprise of the early morning attack, hit them before they were fully awake. The Royal Navy would provide fire support, destroy the coastal guns, suppress any German resistance. The commandos would land in assault boats, secure the town, destroy the factories, kill or capture the garrison, and be gone before German reinforcements could arrive from the mainland. Simple plan. Of course, no plan survives contact with the enemy. The landing craft hit the beach just after dawn, and there was Jack Churchill standing in the front of the lead boat. He had his broadsword strapped to his belt, the basket-hilted claymore that he'd been carrying since France. His rifle was slung across his back, grenades on his webbing, and tucked under one arm his bagpipes. The other commandos were checking their weapons, preparing to charge off the boat into whatever the Germans were about to throw at them. Churchill was inflating his pipes. The ramp dropped, and before anyone else could move, Churchill stepped off playing the March of the Cameron Men at full volume. The sound of bagpipes echoed across the snow-covered beach and into the town beyond. The Germans in their positions heard this impossible sound and froze. What the hell was happening? Was this some kind of trick? A diversion? Why was there music? Churchill didn't care what they thought. He marched up that beach playing his pipes, his men following behind him, and the Germans were so confused that the commandos made it halfway to the first buildings before anyone started shooting. Then all hell broke loose. The German garrison realised they were under attack and opened fire. Machine guns from prepared positions, rifle fire from windows. The commandos scattered and returned fire. The carefully planned assault turned into a chaotic close-quarters battle in the narrow streets of the town. Buildings on fire, explosions, men fighting house to house. Exactly the kind of combat the commandos trained for. Exactly the kind of situation where conventional tactics don't work, and you need soldiers who can think independently and adapt. Churchill put down his pipes and drew his sword. Yes, his sword. While his men were using submachine guns and grenades, their commanding officer charged a German position with a medieval weapon. One of the commandos later described watching Churchill sprint toward a building, kick in the door and disappear inside. They heard shouting in German. Then silence. Then Churchill emerged dragging 2 prisoners, his sword still in his hand. He handed the prisoners off to another soldier and kept moving. The man was absolutely fearless. The raid lasted about 6 hours. The commandos systematically destroyed every military target on the island, blew up the fish oil factories, demolished the German headquarters, destroyed ammunition dumps, set fire to everything that would burn. They killed over 100 German soldiers and captured nearly 100 more. The Royal Navy pounded the coastal defences until nothing was left but rubble. It was a complete success, a perfect demonstration of what the commandos could do. And the Germans were terrified, because they realised that this could happen anywhere, any night, any town along the thousands of miles of coastline they now had to defend. Churchill was everywhere during the raid. His men reported seeing him moving from position to position, always in the thick of the fighting. He'd be at one end of the town directing an assault on a German strongpoint. Then 5 minutes later, he'd appear at the other end helping evacuate wounded. He seemed to have unlimited energy, no fear whatsoever. At one point, he climbed onto a roof to get a better view of German positions and calmly stood there under fire, directing his men's movements like he was conducting an orchestra instead of a battle. When the raid was over, and the commandos were loading back onto the boats, Churchill did something that became part of his legend. The operation was a success. They'd achieved all objectives. Casualties were lighter than expected. Everyone was exhausted but elated. They'd hit the Germans hard and gotten away clean. Churchill gathered his men on the beach and pulled out his pipes again. And while the town burned behind them and German reinforcements were racing toward the island, he played a victory song. His men stood there in the snow, covered in soot and blood, and listened to their commanding officer celebrate with bagpipe music. Some of them were grinning, some were shaking their heads in disbelief. All of them knew they'd just witnessed something they'd tell their grandchildren about. The boats pulled away from Vogsoy and headed back toward the ships offshore. Churchill stood in the stern of his boat, still playing his pipes, watching the island recede into the distance. The mission had been perfect. Textbook special operations, and he'd proven something important. The medieval weapons weren't just for show. The sword had been useful in close quarters. The psychological effect of the bagpipes had been real. The Germans had been confused and demoralised by facing an enemy who fought like something out of their history books. But the day wasn't over yet. Back on HMS Kenya, the commandos were celebrating and checking equipment and comparing stories about the raid. Churchill was standing near the stern, probably thinking about the after-action report he'd have to write, when one of the British demolition experts made a catastrophic mistake. He was handling explosives that should have been disarmed. Something went wrong. The charge detonated. The explosion wasn't huge, but it was close to Churchill. Very close. The blast wave knocked him off his feet, shrapnel peppered the deck around him, and Churchill realised that something was wrong with his face. He reached up and felt wetness, blood, lots of blood. The explosion had shattered a bottle of wine he'd been holding. He'd opened it to celebrate the successful raid. Now the bottle was destroyed and glass fragments were embedded in his forehead. He'd survived 6 hours of combat in a German-occupied town without a scratch. Then he got wounded by friendly fire on his own ship because someone mishandled explosives. Churchill went to the ship's doctor and got patched up. 14 stitches across his forehead. The doctor told him he was lucky. A few inches lower and the glass would have taken out his eyes. Churchill shrugged it off. He'd been through worse, and besides, the raid was a success. That's what mattered. The wounds would heal. The scars would just be another story to tell. He went back on deck, found another bottle of wine, and rejoined his men. They'd earned this celebration. Operation Archery made headlines back in Britain. The newspapers loved it. British commandos strike at the heart of Nazi-occupied Norway. Destroy German installations, capture enemy soldiers, escape without major casualties. It was exactly the kind of aggressive action the British public wanted to see after years of defensive fighting and retreat. The commandos became instant heroes, and Jack Churchill became famous. The papers picked up on the details: the sword-wielding officer, the bagpipes, the medieval warrior fighting in a modern war. They started calling him Fighting Jack Churchill. Mad Jack. The name stuck. Churchill was awarded the Military Cross and Bar for his leadership during the raid. The citation specifically mentioned his extraordinary courage under fire and his inspirational leadership. But what they didn't mention, what couldn't be put in an official citation, was the psychological impact he had on both sides. His own men would follow him anywhere because they'd seen him in combat and knew he was the real thing. And the Germans were genuinely frightened of him. They'd never encountered anything like this. An officer who played music before attacking, who fought with swords, who seemed to enjoy combat like it was a sport. Word spread through the German military about the mad British officer with the medieval weapons. Some German commanders thought the reports were exaggerated. Propaganda, maybe. Psychological operations. But the soldiers who'd faced him at Vogsoy knew the truth. They'd heard the pipes, they'd seen the sword, and they'd watched their comrades get captured by a man who fought like he'd stepped out of the Middle Ages. It was deeply unsettling. Modern soldiers are trained to deal with modern weapons, machine guns, mortars, tanks. They're not trained to fight someone who charges at them with a sword while playing music. That was Churchill's secret weapon, not the sword itself, not the bagpipes themselves, but the complete psychological disruption he created. Soldiers in combat are scared. That's normal. Fear is a survival mechanism, but there are levels of fear. There's the fear of bullets and bombs, which soldiers train to deal with, and then there's the fear of the unknown, the fear of something that doesn't make sense. That's what Churchill created. He made the enemy soldiers question their reality. Why is this officer doing this? What kind of man brings a sword to a gunfight? Is he insane? Is this some kind of trap? And while they're asking these questions, while they're confused and off balance, Churchill and his commandos are already inside their positions, capturing them. By early 1942, Jack Churchill was one of the most decorated officers in the British commandos. He'd proven himself in France. He'd led a successful raid in Norway. He'd shown that aggressive leadership and unconventional tactics could achieve results that conventional approaches couldn't. And he was just getting started. The raid on Vogsoy was impressive, but it was nothing compared to what was coming. The Italian campaign. The night he captured 42 German soldiers with nothing but his sword and 1 corporal. The actions that would earn him the Distinguished Service Order. The missions that would prove, beyond any doubt, that Mad Jack Churchill was the most dangerous commando in the British military. But right now, in the aftermath of Operation Archery, Churchill was simply satisfied. He'd led men in combat. He'd achieved all objectives. He'd used his sword and his pipes exactly as he'd always planned. He'd proven that the old ways still worked, that sometimes what modern warfare needs is someone who refuses to fight like everyone else, someone who brings chaos and confusion to a battlefield that's already chaotic and confusing, someone who makes the enemy question everything they think they know about combat. The Germans controlled most of Europe. They had better tanks, better aircraft, more men, more resources, but they didn't have Jack Churchill, and that was about to become a very serious problem for them. Because Churchill was heading to the Mediterranean next, to Sicily, to Italy, to the beaches of Salerno, where he would pull off the most impossible capture of the entire war. The bagpipes had been played, the sword had been drawn, and Mad Jack Churchill was just warming up. July 1943, the Mediterranean Sea. Allied forces are preparing to invade Sicily. Operation Husky. The beginning of the Italian campaign. Thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of soldiers. The largest amphibious operation the world has ever seen up to this point. And standing on the deck of a transport ship, fully loaded with combat gear, is Jack Churchill. He's now a lieutenant colonel, commander of No. 2 Commando, and strapped across his back, visible to every soldier on that ship, is a Scottish broadsword. Around his neck, a longbow and a quiver of arrows. Under his arm, his bagpipes. The new recruits stare at him like he's escaped from the mental hospital. The veterans just smile. They know what's coming. They've seen Mad Jack in action before. The invasion of Sicily was the first major Allied offensive in Europe since Dunkirk. 3 years of preparing, 3 years of building up forces, 3 years of planning how to take the fight back to the Axis powers. The Americans and British were finally ready to strike at what Churchill called the soft underbelly of Europe. Italy. Take Sicily first. Use it as a launching point to invade the Italian mainland. Knock Italy out of the war. Force Germany to divert troops from other fronts. It was sound strategy. But strategy is one thing. Actually executing an amphibious invasion against a defended coastline is something else entirely. Churchill had spent the month since Norway training his commandos for exactly this kind of operation. Amphibious landings, night operations, operating behind enemy lines. His unit was considered one of the best in the British military. They'd recruited carefully, trained brutally, weeded out anyone who couldn't handle the physical and mental demands. What remained was a group of absolutely lethal soldiers who trusted each other completely, and they trusted their commander even though he was clearly insane, or maybe because he was clearly insane. It's hard to worry about your own safety when your commanding officer is treating the war like it's the adventure of a lifetime. The landing in Sicily went better than expected. The Italian defenders weren't particularly motivated. Many of them surrendered without much fighting. The Germans put up stiffer resistance, but they were outnumbered and couldn't hold the beaches. Within days, Allied forces were pushing inland. Churchill and No. 2 Commando were in the thick of it, moving fast, hitting German positions, capturing key terrain. This was what commandos did best. Not holding ground, not digging in, moving, attacking, creating chaos. And Churchill was still carrying his full medieval arsenal. His men had given up questioning it. They'd seen him use the sword in close quarters. They'd heard him play the pipes before attacks. One of the commandos later wrote in his diary that watching their colonel march through Sicily with a broadsword was the most surreal experience of the war. Here they were in 1943 with tanks and artillery and aircraft overhead, and their commander looked like he was heading to Bannockburn in 1314. But nobody laughed, because they'd all seen what happened to German soldiers who underestimated Mad Jack Churchill. By September, the Allies were ready for the next phase, Operation Avalanche, the invasion of mainland Italy at Salerno. This was going to be harder than Sicily. The Germans knew it was coming. They'd reinforced the area, set up defensive positions in the hills overlooking the beaches, positioned artillery to cover every approach. The Allies were going to have to fight for every yard of beach, every foot of elevation. It was going to be bloody. No. 2 Commando was assigned a critical mission. There were hills overlooking the western side of Salerno Bay. German observation posts on those hills were directing artillery fire onto the beaches. Allied forces were getting hammered. Ships were being hit. Landing craft were being destroyed. The Germans could see everything from those hills. They needed to be taken out. And that job fell to Churchill and his commandos. Take the hills, eliminate the observation posts, stop the artillery fire, simple mission. Except the hills were heavily defended. German infantry dug in. Machine gun positions, mortars. And the terrain was a nightmare. Steep slopes, rocky ground, terraced vineyards that created natural defensive positions every 50 yards. Churchill studied the terrain and came up with a plan that everyone thought was crazy. Most commanders would have attacked during the day with air and artillery support, overwhelming firepower. Churchill decided to attack at night, with no artillery preparation, no air support, just his commandos moving silently up the hills in the dark. 6 columns advancing parallel to each other, and to make sure the columns didn't lose contact with each other in the darkness, he ordered them to yell "Commando" every 5 minutes. Yes, stealth assault, in the dark. While yelling at the top of their lungs, this was peak Mad Jack Churchill planning. But there was method to the madness. The Germans were expecting a conventional attack, daytime assault with lots of supporting fire. Churchill was going to do the opposite. Hit them at night when they were tired and scared. The yelling would confuse them. They'd think the British force was much larger than it actually was. Voices coming from multiple directions. Can't see the enemy. Don't know how many there are. That's fear. That's psychological warfare. Make the enemy's imagination work against them. The assault launched just after midnight on September 10th. Churchill led from the front as always. He was positioned between the 3rd and 4th columns, close enough to control both. The commandos moved up the terraced hillsides in complete darkness. Rocky terrain. Grapevines catching on equipment. Every few minutes the shout went up. "Commando?" The word echoed across the hillside from 6 different positions. The Germans in their positions heard these shouts and panicked. How many British were out there? Where were they coming from? What kind of unit announces itself like that? The psychological effect was exactly what Churchill wanted. The first German positions fell quickly, surprised in the dark, overwhelmed before they could mount effective resistance. The commandos cleared each terrace systematically, moving fast, using grenades and close-quarters weapons. The sword came out. Churchill was using it to direct his men and to fight when things got close, and things got very close. This was knife-fighting distance combat, no room for rifles, hand-to-hand in the dark. Exactly the kind of fighting where a sword is actually useful. You can thrust with it, slash with it, use it to block. It doesn't run out of ammunition, and it's absolutely terrifying to face. By dawn, No. 2 Commando had taken their objectives. The observation posts were destroyed. The German artillery fire slackened because they couldn't see their targets anymore. Allied forces on the beaches got a respite. The mission was a success. Churchill's men had captured over 60 prisoners and inflicted heavy casualties on the German defenders. But Churchill wasn't done. He'd heard intelligence reports about a German position outside a small town called Melina. An observation post controlling the pass that led down to the beaches. It needed to be taken out, and Churchill decided he was going to do it himself. He called over his corporal, a tough Scottish soldier named Ruffle. Good man. Reliable. Churchill explained what he wanted to do. Sneak into the town, find the observation post, take it out. Just the 2 of them. Ruffle looked at his commanding officer like he'd finally lost his mind completely. "Sir," he said, "there's a whole German garrison in that town." Churchill smiled. "I know," he said. "That's why we're going at night. They won't be expecting just 2 men. Now are you coming or not?" Ruffle sighed. He'd known Churchill long enough to know there was no talking him out of this. "Yes, sir," he said. "I'm coming." They left after dark, 2 men, moving through enemy territory, heading toward a town full of German soldiers. Churchill had his sword, Ruffle had his rifle and knife. That was it. No support, no backup plan, no extraction if things went wrong. This was either going to be the most brilliant special operation of the war, or the stupidest way 2 soldiers ever got themselves killed. Churchill was betting on brilliant. They approached Molina carefully. The town was dark, blackout conditions, good for them. They could hear German voices, soldiers talking, someone laughing, normal garrison sounds. The Germans weren't on high alert. They didn't think the British would be this far inland this fast. Churchill and Ruffle moved through the streets like ghosts, staying in shadows, avoiding the main roads. Churchill had memorised the layout from maps. He knew roughly where the observation post should be. They just had to find it without being spotted by several hundred German soldiers. They found it on a hilltop on the edge of town. Stone building, reinforced, radio antenna on the roof. That was it. And standing outside, a German mortar crew. 4 men, smoking cigarettes, their weapons stacked against the wall, not expecting trouble. Churchill and Ruffle crouched in the darkness and watched. 4 Germans, 2 British. Not great odds if it came to a fight. But Churchill wasn't planning to fight. He was planning to capture them. He drew his sword. Ruffle stared at him. "Sir," Ruffle whispered, "we should just shoot them and run." Churchill shook his head. "Too much noise," he whispered back. "We take them quietly, then we get the ones inside. Trust me." Ruffle wanted to argue, but he'd seen Churchill pull off impossible things before, and arguing with a man holding a medieval sword in the middle of enemy territory seemed like a bad idea. Churchill stood up and walked straight toward the German soldiers. Just walked out of the shadows like he owned the place. The Germans saw him coming and froze. They probably thought he was one of theirs at first. By the time they realised he wasn't, Churchill was 10 feet away with his sword pointed at them. "Hände hoch," he said in terrible German. "Hands up." The Germans looked at the sword, looked at each other, looked back at the sword. One of them started to reach for his rifle. Churchill took 1 step forward and put the tip of the blade against the man's throat. The German froze. Churchill smiled. "Good choice," he said in English. Ruffle came out of the shadows with his rifle trained on the group. The Germans slowly raised their hands. They were completely bewildered. Who were these 2 men? Why did one of them have a sword? What was happening? Churchill gestured toward the building. "Inside," he said. "Schnell, quickly." The Germans moved toward the door. Churchill followed them, sword still ready. Ruffle covered the rear. This was insane. They were walking into a German position. Outnumbered. With only a sword and a rifle. If this went wrong, they were both dead. Inside the building, more Germans. The observation post crew, maps on the walls, radio equipment, maybe 8 more soldiers. They looked up as the door opened, saw their comrades coming in with hands raised, saw the British officer behind them with a sword. For about 3 seconds, nobody moved. Everyone was trying to process what they were seeing. Then Churchill barked an order. "Everyone on the floor! Now!" He didn't speak German well, but apparently he said it with enough authority that the Germans obeyed. They dropped to the floor, hands behind their heads. Churchill and Ruffle now had 12 prisoners, in a building, in the middle of a German-held town, with no backup, no way to call for help, and no clear plan for getting out. Ruffle was sweating. "Sir," he said quietly, "what now?" Churchill was searching the Germans, taking their weapons, tossing rifles and pistols into a corner. "Now," he said cheerfully, "we see how many more we can get." They left Ruffle guarding the prisoners and Churchill went back outside, alone, with his sword. He moved through the town looking for more German positions, found a machine gun nest, 3 soldiers. Churchill walked up behind them and put his sword against the back of the gunner's neck. The man went rigid. Churchill's German was limited, but he knew the important words. Surrender. The gunner called to his companions. They turned, saw the sword, looked at each other, surrendered. Churchill marched them back to the observation post. 15 prisoners now. He did this 4 more times, found German positions, walked up with his sword, made them surrender. Each time the Germans were so shocked by the sight of a British officer with a medieval weapon that they just gave up. They thought they were surrounded. Thought this must be the advance element of a much larger force. Why else would this man be so confident? Churchill was counting on that assumption. He was counting on them being confused and scared enough that they wouldn't think clearly. By the time he was done, Churchill and Ruffle had captured 42 German soldiers. 42, including a complete mortar squad with all their equipment. 2 men had infiltrated a German-held town and captured a force 20 times their size, and they'd done it primarily with a sword. Churchill organised his prisoners, made them carry their own weapons with the bolts removed, made them carry their own ammunition, made the wounded ride in a cart. Then he and Ruffle marched this entire group back through the German lines to British positions. Picture this scene. It's just before dawn. British soldiers in their positions overlooking Salerno. They're exhausted from fighting, waiting for the Germans to counterattack, and out of the darkness comes a column of people. They raise their weapons, ready to fire. Then they realise what they're seeing. German soldiers, dozens of them, carrying weapons, pushing a cart, and at the front of this column 1 British officer with a sword and 1 corporal with a rifle. The British soldiers just stared. What in the name of God was happening? Churchill marched his prisoners into the British lines and handed them over to the intelligence officers. 42 prisoners, he reported. 1 observation post destroyed. 1 mortar crew captured intact. Mission accomplished. The intelligence officers couldn't believe it. How did you do this? Churchill shrugged. I asked them politely, he said. With this. He held up his sword. The intelligence officers looked at each other. They'd heard the stories about Mad Jack. They hadn't believed them. Now they believed. Churchill later said the march back reminded him of the Napoleonic Wars, a column of prisoners trudging through the night, wounded in carts, captors and captured mixed together. It was something out of 1815, not 1943. But it had worked. His unconventional approach had worked. The sword had worked. The sheer audacity had worked. Because the Germans couldn't conceive that 2 men would be crazy enough to try what Churchill had just done. Their assumptions about how warfare worked had been turned against them. The captured mortar crew provided valuable intelligence, troop positions, defensive plans, communication codes, the kind of information that saves lives. The British commanders were ecstatic. This was exactly what commando operations were supposed to achieve. Small forces, high impact, disproportionate results, and Churchill had done it in the most Churchill way possible, with a sword and sheer insanity. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for the action at Salerno. The citation praised his extraordinary leadership and courage. But even the official citation couldn't capture how insane this operation had been. 2 men, 42 prisoners, a medieval weapon in the middle of World War II. It was the kind of story that if you put it in a movie, audiences would call it unrealistic. Nobody would do that. Nobody would be that crazy. Except Jack Churchill had done it, and he'd do it again. But there was one more detail. The next morning, after Churchill had handed over his prisoners and written his report and grabbed a few hours of sleep, he realised something. He'd lost his sword during the fighting, left it somewhere in the chaos, and that sword was important to him. It had been with him since France, through Norway, through Sicily, through dozens of battles. It was his trademark, his lucky charm. He couldn't just abandon it. So Churchill went back, alone, back through the area where they'd fought, back toward the German lines, looking for his sword. His men tried to stop him. Sir, the area isn't secure. There are still Germans up there. Churchill waved them off. I'll be fine, he said. I'm just retrieving my property. And he walked back up into the hills, into an area that was still being contested, still being fought over, because he wanted his sword back. He found it an hour later, lying in the rocks where he'd dropped it during the fight. He picked it up, checked the blade, still good, sheathed it, and walked back to British lines like he'd just been out for a morning stroll. His men shook their heads. Their commanding officer was absolutely mad, but he'd gotten 42 prisoners with that sword. He'd proven it worked. So if he wanted to risk his life to retrieve it, well, that was just Churchill being Churchill. The Italian campaign was just beginning. There would be more battles, more operations, more chances for Churchill to prove that sometimes the old ways work better than anyone expects. But the night at Salerno would always be special. The night Mad Jack Churchill captured 42 German soldiers with a sword and 1 corporal. The night he proved that audacity and psychological warfare can defeat superior numbers. The night he showed that the most dangerous weapon isn't always the most advanced. Sometimes the most dangerous weapon is the one nobody expects. Sometimes it's a man with a sword who absolutely refuses to fight like everyone else. And sometimes that's exactly what wins battles. In 1944, the Adriatic Sea. Churchill is on a ship heading toward the island of Vis off the coast of Yugoslavia. He's been promoted again, still commanding No. 2 Commando, still carrying his sword and bagpipes. But this time, the mission is different. This isn't a quick raid. This is supporting a full partisan army fighting a guerrilla war against German occupation. And Churchill is about to walk into the most catastrophic battle of his entire war. The battle where everyone dies except him. The battle where the music stops. The battle where Mad Jack Churchill finally meets his match. Let me give you context. By mid-1944, the war is turning. The Allies landed in Normandy on D-Day, June 6th. But that hasn't happened yet when Churchill ships out for Yugoslavia. The Soviets are pushing the Germans back on the Eastern Front. Italy is slowly being liberated. And in Yugoslavia, something remarkable is happening. A communist partisan leader named Josip Broz Tito is leading a massive resistance movement against the Germans. Tens of thousands of fighters, controlling significant territory, tying down entire German divisions that could be fighting elsewhere. The British want to support these partisans, keep the Germans occupied, create more chaos behind enemy lines. That's where the McLean mission comes in. Named after Brigadier Fitzroy McLean, a British officer tasked with coordinating support for Tito's forces, the mission operates out of Vis, an island the partisans control. From there, they launch raids against German-held islands and coastal positions, supply the partisans, gather intelligence. It's dangerous work. The Germans are all around them, and Tito's partisans are tough fighters, but they're not trained soldiers. They're farmers and workers and students who picked up weapons. Brave, absolutely. Disciplined? Not always. Churchill arrives on Vis in early May. He immediately starts planning operations. There's a German-held island called Brach. Strategic location. Good harbour. The Germans use it to move supplies and troops. If the partisans could take Brach, it would disrupt German logistics significantly. Churchill is ordered to plan and execute a raid on the island. He's given a mixed force. 43 Commando, a troop from 40 Commando, and 1,500 Yugoslav partisans. It's a huge operation by Commando standards, more than 1,500 fighters total, against a German garrison that intelligence estimates at maybe 200 soldiers. Churchill spends weeks planning, studying maps, coordinating with the partisan commanders, working out logistics. The plan is ambitious. Land at night, overwhelm the German positions quickly, destroy installations, capture or kill the garrison, hold the island long enough to evacuate civilians who want to leave, then withdraw before German reinforcements arrive. It's doable. The numbers favour them, but Churchill is experienced enough to know that numbers don't mean much if your force isn't coordinated, and that's the problem. The partisans are brave, but they're not commandos. They don't have the training, they don't have the discipline, and they don't necessarily trust British plans. Some of the partisan commanders want to fight their way, hit hard and fast. Others want to be more cautious. Churchill is trying to coordinate all this while dealing with language barriers and cultural differences, and the general chaos of coalition warfare. It's a nightmare of military planning, but he's determined to make it work. The operation launches on May 15th. The assault force loads onto boats and crosses to Brach under cover of darkness. The landing is unopposed. Perfect start. They get everyone ashore without any casualties. The commandos move inland immediately, heading for their assigned objectives. The partisans follow. Everything is going according to plan. Then they see the German positions. Gun emplacements on high ground, fortified, more extensive than intelligence reported. This isn't 200 soldiers. This is more. Maybe twice that. Maybe more. The partisan commanders see those positions and stop. They want to wait until morning. Attack in daylight when they can see what they're doing. Churchill argues against it. "We have surprise," he says. "We're already ashore. If we wait until morning, the Germans will be fully alert. We'll lose men. Attack now while we have the advantage of darkness. But the partisans won't budge. Their commanders insist. We wait for dawn." Churchill is furious, but he can't force them to attack. They outnumber his commandos 10-1, so they wait. Dawn comes. The element of surprise is gone. The Germans have had all night to prepare, and now the assault has to go in during daylight, across open ground, against prepared positions. This is exactly what Churchill was trying to avoid, but orders are orders. The attack begins. Churchill signals his commandos forward with his bagpipes, the march of the Cameron men echoing across the island. It's supposed to inspire his men, intimidate the enemy. But this time, the Germans are ready. They've heard about the mad British officer with the bagpipes. They're not falling for it again. Machine gun fire rips into the assault force. Mortars start falling. The commandos take cover and return fire. They're professional soldiers. They know how to operate under fire. But the partisans panic. Some of them break and run. Others freeze in place. The careful coordination Churchill planned falls apart instantly. He's trying to get his commandos forward while partisan units are streaming past him going the other way. It's chaos. Total chaos. And the Germans are pouring fire into the whole mess. Churchill makes a decision. He can't coordinate this disaster. The partisans have completely lost cohesion, but his commandos are still functioning. They can still take their objective if he can get them there. He orders 43 Commando to Executor. Flanking attack on the left. He'll take the elements from 40 Commando straight up the middle. The partisans can do whatever they want. His people are going forward. The commandos fight their way inland, house to house, trench to trench. This is brutal close-quarters combat. The kind of fighting where training and discipline matter more than numbers. The commandos are taking casualties, but they're moving forward. Churchill is everywhere, running between positions, directing fire, pulling wounded men to cover, still carrying his sword, still refusing to show fear even though bullets are snapping past his head constantly. His men draw courage from him. If the old man isn't scared, why should we be? They reach their objective, a German strongpoint on a hill. This is what they came for. Take this position and the entire German defence starts to crumble. But by now, Churchill realises they're in serious trouble. Most of the partisans have withdrawn back to the beach. Only his commandos are still fighting. Maybe 50 men total out of the 1,500 they landed with. And the Germans are converging on their position. More enemy soldiers arriving every minute. What was supposed to be a quick raid has turned into a desperate fight for survival. Churchill counts heads. 7 men made it to the objective with him. 7 out of 50. Everyone else is dead, wounded, or pinned down somewhere between here and the beach. 7 men holding a position against a German force that's growing by the minute. This is bad. This is very bad. But Churchill isn't ready to withdraw yet. They came here to do a job. They're going to do it. He orders his men to set up a defensive perimeter, conserve ammunition, hold as long as possible. The Germans probe their position, testing the defences, looking for weak points. Churchill's men fight them off. Hours pass. The sun climbs higher. It's getting hot. They're running low on ammunition, running low on water, and the Germans are getting braver, closing in. Churchill knows they can't hold much longer. He needs to make a decision. Stay and die. Or withdraw and save what's left of his force. Every military instinct says withdraw. Tactical retreat. Preserve your men for the next fight. But Churchill has never retreated in his life. He doesn't know how. Then the mortars start falling. German mortar crews have finally gotten their range. Shells dropping right on top of Churchill's position. The explosions are deafening. Shrapnel shredding everything. Men screaming. Churchill is crouched behind a low wall playing his bagpipes. Yes, under mortar fire. Playing Will Ye No Come Back Again. A Scottish tune about soldiers who died and never returned home. It's absolutely surreal. His men are fighting and dying and their commanding officer is playing funeral music while bombs fall around them. One of the commandos yells at him, "Sir, we need to go. Now." Churchill keeps playing. The man thinks his commander has finally lost his mind. Completely. Another mortar round hits. Closer this time. The explosion throws dirt and rocks everywhere. One of Churchill's men goes down. Then another. Churchill stops playing and looks around. 5 men left now. No, 4. Another one isn't moving. This is it. This is where the luck runs out. A mortar shell lands directly in their position. The explosion is massive, shrapnel in all directions. Churchill feels the blast wave hit him like a physical force. He's thrown backwards. His bagpipes are torn out of his hands. He hits the ground hard. Can't breathe. Can't hear. Everything is muffled and distant. He tries to get up. Can't. Something's wrong. He looks down. Blood. A lot of blood. He can't tell if it's his or someone else's. He looks around for his men. They're not moving. None of them. All 6 commandos are dead or dying. He's the only one left. Churchill reaches for his sword. It's still strapped to his belt. If he's going to die, he's going to die fighting. He gets to his knees. Then he hears them. Germans. Running toward the position. Yelling orders. Coming to finish the job. Churchill tries to stand. The world spins. He's hurt worse than he thought. Probably concussion from the blast. Maybe shrapnel wounds. Hard to tell. Everything is confused. He reaches for his sword again, grabs the handle, draws it halfway out of the sheath. Then something explodes right next to him. Grenade. German stick grenade. The concussion hits him like a hammer. His vision goes white, then black, then nothing. He's unconscious before he hits the ground. The last thing he hears is German voices, shouting, getting closer, then silence. When Churchill wakes up, he's face down in the dirt. His hands are tied behind his back. His sword is gone. His bagpipes are gone. His weapons are gone. German soldiers are standing over him, talking in quick, nervous German. One of them kicks him in the ribs, not hard, just checking if he's really awake. Churchill groans, tries to move, can't. Everything hurts. His head feels like it's splitting open. Blood in his eyes. Can't see clearly. This is it. This is capture. After 5 years of war, after dozens of operations, after surviving France and Norway and Sicily and Italy, he finally got caught. The Germans search him. Take his identification papers. One of them finds something interesting. Churchill. The name Churchill. They start talking excitedly. Is this him? Could this be related to Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister's family? They need to get this prisoner to command immediately. This could be important. Churchill wants to laugh, but his jaw hurts too much. They think he's related to Winston. He's not. No family connection at all. Just the same last name. But if they want to think that, fine. Maybe it'll keep him alive long enough to escape. They drag him to his feet. He can barely stand. 2 soldiers have to hold him upright. They march him down from the hilltop, past the bodies of his men, past the destroyed German positions, past the evidence of the battle. The partisans are long gone, withdrawn back to Vis. The commandos who didn't make it to the objective are probably dead or captured too. Churchill is alone now, prisoner of war, everything he's fought for, everything he's risked, and it ends here, on this miserable island. Because the partisans wouldn't attack when he said to attack, because the coordination failed, because sometimes luck runs out. They put him on a truck, drive him to the harbour, load him onto a boat. He's going to the mainland, to a prison camp probably, or to a firing squad if they realise he's not related to Winston. Either way, his war is over. Mad Jack Churchill, the officer who fought with medieval weapons, the man who captured 42 prisoners with a sword, the bagpiper who played music in the middle of battles, defeated. Not by superior tactics, not by better soldiers, but by bad intelligence, poor coordination, and a mortar shell at exactly the wrong moment. The boat pulls away from Bratch. Churchill sits in the hold, hands still tied, blood still dripping from various wounds. He's thinking about his men, the 6 who died on that hilltop, the others scattered across the island. He's thinking about the mission failure. The Germans still hold the island. Nothing was accomplished. All those casualties for nothing. He's thinking about his sword, his bagpipes. Gone. Captured by the Germans. Trophies now. Some German officer will probably hang them on a wall. But most of all, he's thinking about escape. Because Jack Churchill doesn't stay captured. He doesn't accept defeat. He doesn't quit. They're taking him to a prison camp. Fine. He'll escape from the prison camp. They're going to interrogate him. Fine. He won't tell them anything useful. They think they've won. They think the mad British officer is finally out of the war. They have no idea who they're dealing with. They have no idea that capturing Jack Churchill is just the beginning of a whole new nightmare for them. Because the man who fights with swords and plays bagpipes under fire isn't going to sit quietly in a prison cell. Not a chance. The war isn't over for Mad Jack Churchill. It's just entering a new phase. A phase where he's going to prove that sometimes the most dangerous prisoner is the one who has absolutely nothing left to lose. The truck stops. Churchill is shoved out onto concrete. His hands are still bound. His wounds are still bleeding. He's been travelling for 2 days. No food, little water, no medical attention. The Germans moved him fast from Yugoslavia to Austria, then to Germany. Now he's somewhere he doesn't recognise. Industrial buildings, barbed wire, guard towers, and a sign over the gate. Sachsenhausen. He's heard that name before. This isn't a regular prisoner of war camp. This is a concentration camp, one of the worst in the Nazi system, and they've just thrown a British commando officer into it. Either the Germans think he's too dangerous for a regular POW camp, or they believe he really is related to Winston Churchill and want him somewhere they can control him completely. Either way, Churchill is in serious trouble. Sachsenhausen concentration camp, located just north of Berlin, opened in 1936. By 1944, it's been operating for 8 years. Political prisoners, Jews, Soviet POWs, resistance fighters from occupied countries, anyone the Nazis consider enemies of the state. The conditions are brutal. Forced labour, starvation rations, disease, random executions. This isn't a place where you survive. This is a place where you die slowly. And the guards know it. They have absolute power. No oversight. No rules they have to follow. If a prisoner dies, nobody cares. Nobody investigates. That's just how it works. Churchill is processed like every other prisoner. Stripped, searched, everything taken. The little bit of personal gear he still had is confiscated. They shave his head, give him prison clothing, a number. He's not Lieutenant Colonel Churchill anymore. He's just another prisoner, another number, another body in a system designed to break men completely. The guards look at him and see what everyone sees. Tall, thin, middle-aged British officer. Nothing special, nothing dangerous. They have no idea what he's done. No idea about Norway or Italy or the 42 prisoners captured with a sword. They just see another prisoner to process. But the German intelligence officers know exactly who he is. They've been waiting for him. Churchill is brought to an interrogation room. chained to the floor. The chains are short. He can sit, but he can't stand up fully. Can't pace. Can't move more than a few feet. It's a psychological technique. Make the prisoner feel helpless, trapped, break down their resistance before questioning even starts. 3 German officers enter. They have Churchill's service record. They know about his operations. They know about the raids, and they want information. Troop strengths, landing sites, future operations, command structure, everything. Churchill gives them nothing. Name, rank, serial number. That's all. They push harder, threaten him, promise him better treatment if he cooperates. Churchill just stares at them. The interrogation goes on for hours, then days. They rotate interrogators. Try different approaches. Good cop, bad cop, angry threats, friendly conversation. Nothing works. Churchill won't talk. He's been trained for this. British intelligence drilled it into every commando. You don't give the enemy anything useful. You resist as long as possible. You protect your men and your mission, even if it costs you everything. The interrogators are frustrated. This prisoner should be terrified. He's in Sachsenhausen. He knows what that means. He knows people die here every day, but he's not scared. Or if he is, he's hiding it perfectly. They try a new approach. They tell him they think he's related to Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister's family. That's why he's getting special treatment. That's why he's being interrogated instead of just shot. Churchill almost laughs. He's not related to Winston, not even distant cousins, just the same common last name. But if the Germans want to believe he's important, that's fine with him. Important prisoners don't get executed as quickly. After 2 weeks of interrogation, the Germans give up. They're not getting anything from him. They send him to the main camp. Regular prisoner now. Work details, starvation rations, the full Sachsenhausen experience. And this is where Churchill starts planning his escape. Because he's not staying here. Not a chance. He studies the camp layout, watches the guards, notes their routines, when they change shifts, where they're most alert, where they slack off. He's doing reconnaissance like he's planning a commando raid, because that's exactly what he's planning. A one-man raid, breaking out of one of the most secure concentration camps in Nazi Germany. The other prisoners think he's crazy. Nobody escapes from Sachsenhausen. It's impossible. The guards shoot anyone who tries. The barbed wire is electrified. Guard towers everywhere. Dogs, searchlights. Even if you got over the fence, you're in the middle of Germany, hundreds of miles from any Allied lines. No papers, no money, no civilian clothes. You'd be caught in hours. Better to just keep your head down, do your work, hope you survive until the war ends. That's the smart play. Churchill isn't interested in the smart play. He's interested in getting out. September 1944, 4 months after his capture. Churchill has been watching and waiting, learning the patterns. And tonight something unusual happens. There's a power failure, not a planned blackout. An actual failure. Maybe a generator broke down. Maybe Allied bombing damaged the electrical grid. Doesn't matter. The searchlights go out. The electrified fence goes dead. For maybe 10 minutes, Sachsenhausen is dark. The guards are scrambling, trying to get backup power online, shouting orders, confused. And in that 10 minutes of confusion, Jack Churchill makes his move. He's been loosening boards in his barracks for weeks, working at them every night. Tiny movements, careful not to make noise. Tonight those boards come free. He slips out of the barracks, stays low, moves fast. The fence is 30 yards away. No electricity, but the guards are still there. He can hear them yelling, sees flashlight beams sweeping around randomly. They're not organised yet, still reacting. This is his window. He runs for the fence. The barbed wire tears his prison clothes, cuts his hands, his arms. He doesn't care. He's over the fence in seconds. Drops to the ground on the outside, free side. He's out. He's actually out of Sachsenhausen. Now, he just has to get away before they realise he's gone. Before the lights come back on. Before the dogs are released. He runs into the woods beyond the camp, running blind in darkness, branches hitting his face, roots trying to trip him. He doesn't care, he's free. After 4 months in hell, he's free. He runs for hours, puts as much distance between himself and the camp as possible. By dawn, he's miles away, exhausted, bleeding from dozens of cuts. His prison clothes are torn to shreds. He has no food, no water, no plan beyond getting away, but he's alive and free. That's enough for now. He finds a stream, drinks, washes some of the blood off. Then he starts walking south, toward Allied lines, toward freedom. Churchill walks for days, sleeping in forests, avoiding roads and towns, stealing food when he can. 1 apple from a tree, vegetables from a field. He's trying to get to the Baltic coast. His plan is to steal a boat, sail to Sweden. Sweden is neutral. British personnel who make it to Sweden get repatriated. It's a long shot, but it's the best plan he has. The problem is Germany is huge, and he's in the middle of it, and every police officer and soldier in the area is looking for him. Escaped prisoners don't get far, especially British officers who speak terrible German. He makes it about 125 miles, walking at night, hiding during the day, living on whatever he can scavenge. His body is breaking down. The wounds from Brach never healed properly. The cuts from the fence are infected. He's malnourished from months in Sachsenhausen, plus days of near starvation during the escape. He's running on pure willpower now. Nothing else left, just the absolute refusal to give up. The determination that's kept him alive through 5 years of war. Near the town of Rostock on the Baltic coast, his luck runs out. German police spot him. Ragged man in torn prison clothes, clearly an escaped prisoner. They don't even have to chase him. Churchill is too weak to run. They walk up and arrest him like it's routine, which it probably is for them. Just another recaptured escapee. They don't realise they've just caught the mad British officer who escaped from Sachsenhausen. They just think he's some random prisoner who made a break for it. They put him in a truck, take him back to prison, but not Sachsenhausen. The camps are being reorganised. Prisoners are being moved around as the Soviet army advances from the east. Churchill ends up in a camp in Austria, marked Pongau, smaller camp, not as heavily guarded as Sachsenhausen, and there's something different about this place. It's April 1945 now. The war is clearly ending. Everyone can see it. The guards know it. The camp administrators know it. Germany is collapsing. The question isn't if Germany will lose, it's when. And what happens to everyone when it does. The camp guards are nervous. Some of them are talking about what Allied forces will do when they capture concentration camp personnel. There are rumours about war crimes trials, executions. The guards who participated in atrocities are starting to realise they might be held accountable. Some of them are looking for ways to save themselves, ways to prove they weren't that bad, ways to get mercy when the Allies arrive. And having living British prisoners who can testify that you treated them well might be valuable insurance. Churchill and about 140 other prominent prisoners are kept in a special section. Political prisoners, important POWs, people who might be useful as hostages or bargaining chips. They're not being worked to death like other prisoners. They're being kept alive, fed, given medical care. The guards are being almost polite. Everyone is waiting for the end. Churchill is watching everything, analysing, planning. He's been recaptured once. He's not making the same mistakes again. If another escape opportunity comes, he needs to be ready to move fast and smart. Late April. An SS unit arrives at the camp. They have orders to transfer all the important prisoners to another location. Everyone knows what this means. The SS is going to execute them. Can't leave important prisoners to be liberated by Allied forces. They might have valuable intelligence. Better to kill them and eliminate any risk. The prisoners can see it coming. They're terrified. Some of them want to resist, fight back. Churchill tells them to stay calm, wait. Something might happen. He's survived this long by trusting his instincts, and his instincts say the situation isn't finished yet. The next day, a German army unit shows up. Regular Wehrmacht soldiers, not SS. Their commander is Captain Wichert von Alvensleben, professional officer, not a Nazi fanatic. And he's very concerned about what the SS is planning to do. A delegation of prisoners approaches him, tells him they believe the SS is going to execute them. Von Alvensleben listens. He's facing a choice: follow orders and let the SS do whatever they want, or protect these prisoners and risk getting shot for insubordination. Germany's losing the war. In a week or two, none of this will matter, but right now, in this moment, he has to decide what kind of officer he wants to be. Von Alvensleben positions his Wehrmacht soldiers between the prisoners and the SS unit, tells the SS commander that he's taking responsibility for these prisoners. The SS commander argues. They have orders from Berlin. Von Alvensleben doesn't care. These prisoners are under Wehrmacht protection now. If the SS wants them, they'll have to go through regular army soldiers. The SS commander looks at the Wehrmacht troops, armed, dug in, ready to fight. He looks at his own men, realises that if this turns into a firefight, it's going to be a bloodbath. And for what? The war is almost over anyway. These prisoners don't matter anymore. He orders his SS unit to withdraw. They leave. The prisoners are safe. Churchill and the other prisoners are held under Wehrmacht guard for another week. The guards are friendly, giving them extra food, better treatment. Everyone knows the Americans are coming. It's just a matter of days now. The guards want to make sure the prisoners remember that Wehrmacht soldiers protected them at the end. Want to make sure these witnesses survive to tell that story. It's cynical, but Churchill doesn't care. He's alive. That's what matters. May 2nd, 1945. American forces reach the camp. The Wehrmacht guards surrender immediately, don't even try to fight. They line up and hand over their weapons like they're at an inspection. The American soldiers are confused. Usually there's at least some resistance. These Germans are acting like they're relieved to surrender. The prisoners explain what happened, how the Wehrmacht protected them from the SS, how von Alvensleben risked his career and his life to save them. The Americans make note of it. That testimony will help von Alvensleben at his war crimes trial later. He'll be cleared of all charges, recognised as one of the good Germans who did the right thing at the end. Churchill is processed by American intelligence. They check his identity, verify his service record. Can't quite believe what they're reading. This British officer has been missing since May 1944. 13 months. They assumed he was dead, and here he is, alive. Walking wounded but functional. Ready to get back to his unit. The Americans want to send him to a hospital. Churchill refuses. He wants to return to British command immediately. Wants to get back in the war. The Americans look at him like he's insane. The war in Europe is ending. Germany just surrendered. It's over. What war is he talking about? Churchill explains. Japan. The war against Japan is still going. British forces are fighting in Burma. In the Pacific. He's a combat officer. He belongs in combat, not in some hospital or rear area. The Americans shake their heads. This guy is something else. They arrange transport to get him back to British lines in northern Italy. From there, he'll be sent back to England. What happens after that is up to British command, but Churchill already knows what he wants. He wants to go to Burma. He wants to fight the Japanese, because the war isn't over for him until every enemy is defeated. The journey back takes over a week. He travels with other liberated prisoners and refugees, everyone moving west, away from the Soviet advance, away from the war zone. Churchill is going the opposite direction mentally. While everyone else is celebrating peace, he's planning his next combat deployment. His fellow prisoners think he's crazy. You survived 5 years of war, you survived capture, you survived Sachsenhausen, you escaped, you survived recapture, you got liberated at the last possible moment, and now you want to volunteer for more combat? Churchill just smiles. Of course, he says. That's what soldiers do. They fight. He arrives in northern Italy. American officers help him connect with British command. He's debriefed extensively. Intelligence officers want to know everything about his capture, his interrogation, the camp conditions, his escape, his recapture. They're documenting war crimes, building cases for trials. Churchill tells them everything. names of guards who committed atrocities, officers who ordered executions, the conditions at Sachsenhausen. But he also tells them about von Alvensleben, about the Wehrmacht officer who saved 140 prisoners, about the good Germans. Because Churchill understands that not everyone on the other side was evil. Some were just soldiers following orders, and a few, like von Alvensleben, were brave enough to do the right thing when it mattered. The British officers processing Churchill keep asking him what he wants to do next. Rest? Medical leave? Return to England and see family? Churchill's answer never changes. Burma. I want to go to Burma. They finally agree to pass his request up the chain of command. But they warn him it might not be approved. He's been through hell. Most officers in his position would be given a staff job. Training duty maybe. Something safe. Churchill doesn't want safe. He never wanted safe. But we'll get to Burma in the next section. Right now, what matters is this. Jack Churchill survived. Against impossible odds. Against everything the Nazi system could throw at him. He was captured in battle. Interrogated by the Gestapo. Imprisoned in Sachsenhausen. He escaped. He survived for days behind enemy lines. He was recaptured. He survived months in Austrian camps. He was nearly executed by the SS. And he walked away from all of it. Most men would be broken by that experience, traumatized, unable to function. Churchill came out of it ready to fight again. Ready for the next battle, the next mission. That's what makes him different, that's what makes him Mad Jack. Not that he carried swords and played bagpipes, but that nothing could stop him. Nothing could break him. You could capture him, but you couldn't defeat him. You could imprison him, but you couldn't control him. The Germans thought they'd eliminated a dangerous British officer. They thought they'd taken him out of the war. They had no idea they'd just made him angrier. Just made him more determined. Just given him 13 months to think about what he was going to do when he got free. And now, he was free. Back with Allied forces. Back in the war. And the Germans should be grateful. They surrendered when they did. Because if the war in Europe had lasted a few more months, Mad Jack Churchill would have been back in action. Back with his commandos. Back with a sword and bagpipes. Coming for them. Again. May 1945. Churchill is back in England. First time he's been home in over a year. London is celebrating VE Day, victory in Europe. The war against Germany is over. Street parties everywhere. People dancing, singing, crying with relief. 6 years of war. 6 years of bombing and rationing and fear. Finally over. Churchill walks through the celebrations like he's in a different world. Everyone around him is celebrating peace. He's thinking about the next war because Japan is still fighting, and Jack Churchill is not done yet. British command doesn't know what to do with him. On paper, he's a hero. 2 distinguished service orders, Military Cross and Bar, survived capture and imprisonment. Escaped from Sachsenhausen. Any other officer would be given a medal ceremony, a promotion, and a comfortable staff job for the rest of his career. But Churchill is demanding combat assignment. He wants to go to Burma immediately, join the 14th Army fighting the Japanese in Southeast Asia. The staff officers look at his service record and his medical reports. This man should be in a hospital, physically and mentally exhausted, malnourished from months of imprisonment, infected wounds that never healed properly. He needs rest, recovery, time to process what he's been through. Churchill doesn't care about any of that. Every day he spends in England is a day he's not fighting, and there's still an enemy to fight. The Japanese Empire, still controlling huge portions of Asia, still fighting desperately. The war in Burma is brutal. Jungle warfare, disease, monsoons, fanatical Japanese soldiers who refuse to surrender. It's a meat grinder. Most officers are trying to avoid that assignment. Churchill is volunteering for it. The staff officers finally give up arguing with him. Fine. You want Burma? You can have Burma. They cut orders sending him to Southeast Asia Command. He leaves England in early June, while everyone else is celebrating peace. Mad Jack Churchill is heading back to war. The journey to Burma takes weeks. Ship to India first, then overland to the Burmese front. By the time Churchill arrives at 14th Army headquarters in July, the strategic situation has changed dramatically. The Japanese are in full retreat. British and Indian forces have liberated most of Burma. The Japanese army is shattered, running for the Thai border, still fighting but no longer able to mount effective resistance. Its pursuit operations now, chasing down scattered enemy units. Not the large-scale battles Churchill was expecting. He's assigned to a unit conducting operations in the Burmese highlands, mopping up Japanese holdouts, securing territory. His men are tired. They've been fighting in Burma for years, dealing with the heat and the jungle and the diseases and an enemy that never quits. They've heard rumours about their new commanding officer, the guy who fought with swords, who played bagpipes in battle, who escaped from a concentration camp. They're not sure what to make of it. Sounds like propaganda, exaggerated stories to boost morale. Then Churchill shows up carrying his sword and bagpipes and they realise the stories are true. Their new commander really is completely insane, but Churchill doesn't get his big combat operation, doesn't get his chance to lead men against the Japanese, because on August 6th, 1945, everything changes. An American B-29 bomber drops an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another atomic bomb hits Nagasaki. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito announces Japan's surrender. The war is over. Actually over. No more enemies to fight. No more battles. No more operations. World War II, the largest conflict in human history, is finished. Churchill is in Burma when he gets the news. Japan has surrendered. His men are celebrating, hugging each other, some of them crying. They survived. They're going home. The nightmare is over. Churchill stands apart from the celebration. He's not happy. He's angry, furious. He later makes a statement that becomes one of his most famous quotes. "If it wasn't for those damn Yanks, we could have kept the war going another 10 years. His men think he's joking, a dark joke about American efficiency ending the fun. But Churchill is at least half serious. He's been fighting this war since 1939. 6 years. It's all he's known, all he's done, and now it's over. What is he supposed to do now? Let's step back and analyse what makes this statement so disturbing. Churchill just spent 13 months as a prisoner, was tortured, nearly executed, escaped, and nearly died making his way across Germany. Survived conditions that killed thousands of other prisoners. Any normal person would be grateful the war ended before they had to endure more of that. But Churchill isn't normal. He's not relieved the war is over. He's disappointed. That reveals something dark at the core of his personality. The man genuinely loved war. Not in an abstract patriotic way. He loved actual combat. The danger. The chaos. The testing of himself against impossible odds. That's not heroism. That's something else. Something more complicated and troubling. Modern psychologists would probably diagnose Churchill with something. Addiction to adrenaline maybe. Inability to function in peacetime. Some kind of death wish masked as courage. But in 1945, nobody is thinking about that. The war is over, and that's all that matters. Churchill is ordered back to England along with everyone else. The British military is demobilising. Millions of men going home. The massive wartime army shrinking back to peacetime levels. Churchill doesn't want to go. He argues for staying in Asia. There's still work to do. Security operations, occupation duty, training new forces, anything to stay in uniform and stay active. Command tells him no. Come home. That's an order. So Churchill returns to England in September 1945. The country is exhausted. Victorious but broke. Cities destroyed by bombing. Economy in ruins. Rationing still in effect. Everyone is focused on rebuilding. Creating a peacetime society. Moving forward. Churchill is moving backwards. Back to a life he doesn't want. Back to a world where his skills are useless. What use is a man who's brilliant at leading commando raids, when there are no more raids to lead? What value is a sword-fighting, bagpipe-playing warrior in a world at peace? But Churchill still has one more assignment. He's sent to Mandatory Palestine as second in command of the 1st Battalion, Highland Light Infantry. This is 1947 now, 2 years after the war ended. Palestine is a mess. British Mandate territory caught between Jewish settlers demanding independence and Arab populations resisting. Terrorist attacks, riots, British soldiers trying to keep order while everyone shoots at them. It's a nasty, complicated situation with no good solutions. Most officers hate this duty. Peacekeeping with no clear mission and no support from home, Churchill approaches it the way he approaches everything, aggressively. April 1948, the Hadassah Convoy Massacre. A convoy of Jewish doctors, nurses and patients heading to Hadassah Hospital in Jerusalem is ambushed by Arab fighters. The convoy is trapped, under heavy fire, people dying. British forces in the area are ordered not to intervene. The political situation is too complicated. London doesn't want British troops taking sides, but Churchill is commanding the unit closest to the ambush. He hears the gunfire, gets reports of civilians trapped and dying, and he makes a decision. He's going in. Orders be damned. Churchill leads his men to the ambush site. They fight their way through the Arab positions, break the siege, evacuate the survivors. Approximately 500 Jewish doctors, nurses and patients are saved because Churchill ignored his orders and intervened. He's reprimanded by his superiors, told he violated protocol, created a political incident. Churchill doesn't care. People were dying. He had the ability to save them, so he saved them. That's what soldiers do. Protect the innocent. Stop the killing. Politics can sort itself out later. This incident is important because it shows that Churchill's aggression and his refusal to follow conventional thinking weren't just about fighting enemies. They were about doing what he thought was right regardless of the consequences. He risked his career to save civilians. That's not the action of a man addicted to violence. That's the action of a man with a very clear moral code. Fight hard, protect the weak, never quit. The methods might be unorthodox, the attitude might be crazy, but the core principles are solid. After Palestine, Churchill's military career winds down. He's in his early 40s now. The army is shrinking. There are fewer command positions available, and honestly, Churchill doesn't fit the peacetime military. He's too aggressive, too independent, too willing to ignore orders he thinks are wrong. That works brilliantly in wartime. In peacetime, it's just insubordination. He's given staff positions, training duty, the kind of jobs that keep him in uniform but away from anything important. He hates it, but he serves, because that's the job. 1959. Churchill retires from the British Army after 33 years of service. He's 53 years old. 2 distinguished service orders, Military Cross and Bar, multiple other medals and commendations, a service record that reads like an adventure novel. He's a legend in the commando community. Stories about Mad Jack are told in every Special Forces unit in the British military. The sword, the bagpipes, the impossible captures, the escapes, all of it. He's become mythical. And now he has to figure out how to be a regular civilian. He never really succeeds at that. Churchill in retirement is restless, always looking for the next adventure. He takes up surfing, designs his own surfboard, becomes obsessed with riding the tidal bore on the River Severn. This is a wave that moves upstream during certain tides. Dangerous, unpredictable, perfect for someone who spent his entire life seeking danger. He's the first person to successfully surf the Severn bore. Of course he is. Normal surfing on normal ocean waves would be too boring for Jack Churchill. He also gets involved with steam-powered boats on the Thames. Not modern boats, steamboats. The old technology. He loves them. Spends years restoring old vessels and piloting them between Richmond and Oxford. Again, the old ways, the historical methods. Churchill never stopped being a man out of his proper time. He should have been born in the 18th century, fighting with swords and ships of the line. Instead, he was born in the 20th century and spent his entire life trying to bring the old ways into the modern world. His family describes him as quiet at home. He didn't brag about his war service, didn't tell stories unless someone specifically asked. And even then, he downplayed his actions, made them sound routine, just doing my job, nothing special. His son Malcolm later said that his father would happily discuss his wartime experiences over wine in the evening, but he never boasted, never made himself the hero of his own stories. He talked about his men, about the operations, about the tactical decisions, like he was analysing historical battles that happened to involve him. That's another dimension of Churchill's character that the myths often miss. He wasn't a glory-seeking individual. He was a professional soldier who happened to have very unconventional methods. The sword and bagpipes weren't gimmicks for attention. They were tools he genuinely believed were effective. The psychological warfare aspect, the disruption of enemy expectations, the morale boost for his own men. It all served a purpose, and the fact that it made him famous was almost incidental. He would have done it the same way even if nobody was watching. So what do we make of Jack Churchill? What's the final assessment of the Mad Piper of World War II? Here's what we know for certain. He was one of the most decorated British officers of the war. His tactics worked. The medieval weapons weren't just theatrical, they actually contributed to mission success. His men loved him and followed him into impossible situations because they trusted his judgment. His enemies feared him because he was unpredictable and absolutely fearless. He survived situations that killed thousands of other men, and he did it all while refusing to compromise his principles or his methods. But there's a darker side too. The man who said he wished the war could have lasted another 10 years wasn't joking. Churchill needed war. He was built for it, optimised for it, and peacetime left him adrift. That's tragic in its own way. A man so perfectly suited for his historical moment that when that moment ended he never quite found his place again. He tried. He surfed. He sailed. He raised a family. He lived a quiet life in Surrey. But you get the sense that part of him was always back in Norway or Italy or Yugoslavia, back in combat, back where everything made sense. The German soldiers who faced him probably had nightmares about the mad British officer with a sword and bagpipes, the sound of pipes echoing across a battlefield, the sight of a man charging with a medieval weapon while bullets flew around him. It's psychological warfare at its most effective. Make the enemy question their reality. Make them scared of something they don't understand. Churchill understood that fear is more powerful than bullets sometimes, that the threat of violence is sometimes more effective than actual violence, that creating chaos in the enemy's mind is worth more than any tactical advantage, and that's ultimately what made Jack Churchill so effective. Not the weapons themselves, not the individual acts of courage, but the complete psychological disruption he created wherever he went. Modern militaries spend billions developing psychological operations capabilities, trying to figure out how to get inside the enemy's head. Churchill did it instinctively with a sword and a set of bagpipes. He made warfare personal again, face to face, man to man. In an age of industrial killing and distant firepower, he brought back the ancient terror of close combat, the primal fear of an enemy who's right in front of you, who you can see and hear and smell, who's coming for you specifically. That's why his story endures. That's why we're still talking about Mad Jack Churchill 80 years later. Because he represents something that speaks to us on a deep level. The individual warrior in an age of mass warfare. The man who refused to let technology and bureaucracy and modern military doctrine turn him into just another cog in a machine. He fought his war his way, and it worked. Against all logic and all conventional military wisdom, it worked. World War II produced millions of stories, millions of acts of courage, thousands of decorated heroes. But there's only one Jack Churchill. Only one man who charged into battle playing bagpipes. Only one officer who captured 42 enemy soldiers with a sword. Only one prisoner who escaped from Sachsenhausen. only one warrior who seemed to have stepped out of history into the modern world, the Mad Piper of World War II, the man who proved that sometimes the old ways work better than anyone expects, the soldier who showed that courage and audacity and absolute refusal to accept defeat can overcome superior numbers and better technology. Jack Churchill died in March 1996 at the age of 89. He lived long enough to see the Cold War end, to see the British Empire completely dissolved, to see the world he fought for transform into something unrecognisable. His obituary in the Times included a quote that sums up his entire philosophy. Any officer who goes into action without his sword is improperly dressed. That's how people remembered him, not as a complicated man with darkness alongside his courage, but as Mad Jack, the warrior, the legend, the man who refused to fight like everyone else. And maybe that's appropriate. Maybe the legend is more important than the complicated reality. Because legends inspire people. Legends show what's possible when you refuse to accept limitations, when you decide that the conventional way isn't the only way, when you bring everything you have to the fight and refuse to quit no matter what. That's the legacy of Jack Churchill, not the specific operations or the medals or the individual acts of bravery, but the example, the proof that one person who absolutely refuses to be stopped can change the course of battles. The sword is in a museum somewhere now. The bagpipes probably too. Physical artifacts of an impossible story. Tourists look at them and read the plaques and think it's exaggerated. Nobody really fought like that. It must be propaganda. But it wasn't. It was real. All of it. Every impossible story. Every insane operation. Every time Mad Jack Churchill did something that made his own commanders shake their heads in disbelief. It all happened. And that's what makes it so powerful. Because if Jack Churchill could charge into World War II with a sword and bagpipes, and not only survive but thrive, if he could capture dozens of enemies with medieval weapons, if he could escape from Sachsenhausen, if he could do all of that, then what's stopping the rest of us from being equally bold in our own lives? That's the real story of the Mad Piper of World War II. Not just what he did, but what he proved was possible. That courage matters, that audacity works, that refusing to accept defeat gives you power over situations that seem hopeless, that sometimes the old ways are better, that individuals still matter even in industrial warfare, that the human spirit, properly focused, can overcome almost anything. Jack Churchill embodied all of that, lived it, proved it, and left us with a story that will be told as long as people remember World War II. The unbelievable story of Mad Jack Churchill, the warrior who fought his war with a sword, bagpipes, and absolute fearless determination. The man who showed that sometimes madness and genius are the same thing. The legend who proved that truth really is stranger than fiction.